Hey Zenzap fam, welcome to my channel where we explore the power of mindset, psychology, and transformation. Today, on Women's International Day, we bring to you a story of resilience and unconventional healing with Gloria Lybecker. When Gloria's son experienced birth trauma, she found herself searching beyond traditional medicine and uncovered powerful techniques that transformed not just her son's life, but the lives of many others. And one of those techniques were horse constellations. What do horses have to do with healing and neuroscience? Stick around because what Gloria shares today might just change the way you think about energy, emotions, and well being. All right. Welcome to my channel, Gloria. How are you doing today?
This morning I'm feeling refreshed and invigorated. We had a nice frost outside, and that always just brings up the life energy. Yeah.
That sounds beautiful, Gloria. There's something so refreshing about a frosty morning, and it certainly adds to the lightness and energy to the day. I hope you're enjoying the magic. So I wanted to start with your journey. You have been working with sound energy, medicines, neuroscience, horse constellations. So if you could tell our listeners about what has been your journey.
Well, it's been an extensive journey, but it began as a mom. As a mother, I was very fascinated, especially after my last child was born, that he had some birth trauma. And so the cord was wrapped around his neck 3 times. And what it did is on his growth and development journey, he was showing up differently than his siblings had. And I had a background as a counselor, and so I was really doing some research to figure out what could I do to support him. And he was having these explosive moments that were triggering me from my childhood trauma. But what I did is I went outside of the box because your typical Western medicine psychological perspective is more narrow than what I needed. I needed to find something outside of the box to stay in relationship with my son. So I wanted to know how our brains and body communicate. And there was a really deep curiosity around the emotions and then the behaviors that would show up. And so I found energy medicine, energy psychology, interpersonal neurobiology, particularly with Daniel Siegel, opened up a whole new world for me. That instead of seeing my child as a person that was scary, I could actually start to see his circuitry within him. And I could see when his limbic system, where the emotional alarm center is, would just take over his whole body. And then I could come into my body and I could breathe deep like the horses have helped me learn how to do. And I realized that it was really about connecting with the life energy. Because as my child, he would sync up, his brain or his nervous system would sync up with mine. And if I was activated by his activation, we have like a volcano happening. And so when I could recognize that rumbling that was starting down low, and I could see it and I could catch my own self first, I could then come back to presence and he would follow that energy. So where you place your attention, your energy will follow. So really being able to be consciously aware of what are you focusing on is a big key to all of this. And that's another thing the horses have helped me to develop more fine-tuning with. So that's my start, was my children, finding a way that I could create a safe container to where they can grow and develop to be who they came here to be.
I can't even imagine what you would have gone through at that time. Healing or transforming other people is one part of the game, but seeing your own child going through this journey and navigating all those complexities, I'm quite sure this would have been challenging for you. But you've come out stronger, and I'm glad your children are lucky to have you around. So, Gloria, what was that aha moment when you realized that this is going to be your path and you're going to continue on this journey of healing others?
Well, when I was working closely with my child, one of the things I did to help myself focus is I would write stories about what our experiences were like. And then I would actually share them in my newsletters. Before I would do that, I would read them to my son and I would get his consent that it was okay to share this. I also began leading little groups of families because I realized that I wasn't the only one that might be struggling like this. And I wanted to be able to provide a resource to other parents so that it wasn't so. There's an alarmed aloneness that comes up where you just feel like you're so alone and there's no support anywhere that's really coming from the heart. It's just like all these strategies that are not ones I wanted to use as a mom. So I wanted more people to know that you could stay relational. And so my son would give me permission to use the stories. He even said once, Mom, when I'm older, would you read these to me so I can remember? It was so sweet. But he would even, when I did the parenting, it was the parenting that was all online, and I had people from all over the world. And many times he would just need to be close to me to be able to stay in a state of regulation. And he'd just curl up in a little chair next to me and he'd just listen and he'd fall asleep or whatever. And he actually got to know the other families in that way. And it was meaningful to him to hear that even though he struggled with things, that he wasn't made wrong, that he was met with compassionate understanding. And then other parents were inspired by that to begin to see their children through this new lens. And it's that lens of love that's so important.
Loved you mentioned that you took consent from your son to write those stories about him. That shows the kind of respect you have for everyone around you.
Mm.
You've transformed hundreds of women, and what has been the most challenges that you've come across with parents or with women? What are the major emotional blockages that they have, and how you've helped them overcome?
Well, this is where my experience with my son really did inform me as I would slow down to be with him, because that's really important. It's to meet somebody right where they are. And what comes to mind, there's a couple different people that I've worked with that really suffered from deep neglect in their life. And that leaves such deeply embedded scars, wounds within them. And in order for those to truly heal, they need to be met in the nuances of the flavors of what that was like to experience, which is horrifying. And to have somebody that's willing to just, slow down. It's not about the words you say, it's about the way you are, the being that you actually embody. And so to me, it's a very sacred place. And it's really connecting with source or spirit, whatever word you want to give, life, energy, creation, connecting with that to create this container that has warmth and care and clarity and presence, and just to sit with them and then following their lead. And this again is what the horses will do naturally. And that's really informs me is that heart connection that you can have with all of life. When you can really begin to have that felt sense of it, it transforms your life. And so when I worked with these ladies, there was it just breaks your heart wide open for them to stay with them where they are. And it's not a quick fix, but it is a lasting change. And it's so worth it because the cost is too high not to be in relationship this way. So it's really about choosing to stay with them and for them to have the courage to be so vulnerable as to name the truth of what it's like. Because in that kind of a landscape, there are things that will emerge or come that were unconscious. And they were unconscious, and they need to now have the experience that they're not alone. Because that's a big part of trauma is not the trauma itself, but the way they were treated afterwards. Whether somebody was actually with them or whether they were just set adrift on their own. And a child will think it's all their fault. They will think it must be me. There's something wrong with me. And so for those layers to come up and for them to have the support to begin to witness their own experience with compassion, I call that time travel empathy. It's like, do we have consent for me to accompany your present day self to go back to this aspect of your life? And we need to have consent first, just like with my son. And then we will time travel there and we will see what's happening. Where are you? What's going on? And we'll just slow it all down to where they have a new experience. And that's where the new neural pathways are laid down. And sometimes we need to revisit those so that we can strengthen the new connection between actually their prefrontal cortex and their limbic system. And for their spirit to really strengthen that prefrontal cortex to stay present even when the ruptures come. And that's the growth and development. That's the strengthening. Are you familiar with the brain in the palm of the hand? Yeah. So that's taking that brain, like this is your brain, and
Yes,
here's your brain stem comes up here, the limbic
exactly.
system, and then here's the prefrontal
Mm.
cortex. These two middle fingers are the middle prefrontal cortex, and anatomically they connect everything together. And so what we're doing is we're having a surrogate. When you flip your lid, you lose it. And so when someone flips their lid, we need a surrogate prefrontal cortex to come in and to be with them and to give them that relationship that brings them back. And that may take several times. And the more we strengthen that, the more they begin to embody that relationship in here. To where then when they're not with me, they begin to notice and they begin to be able to take those actions of compassion for themselves. And it's just absolutely so stunning to witness that growth and to celebrate that with them and for them to begin to shine the light of who they came here to be. Yeah.
When I work with NLP, when I do this programming, reprogramming of the subconscious mind, in fact, I also use the same technique where we build new neural pathways
Mhm.
for our client. The most fascinating thing that I find is, or I help my clients to understand, is the cues, those triggers the old pathways. Because till the time they'll not identify those triggers, they'll not be able to break the cycle and create the new neural pathways. So what you just mentioned absolutely resonates. And it makes me also wonder that there are different modalities, be it energy medicine, be it NLP, be it psychology, be it neuroscience. All of them have the same crux. It's all related to our brain. It's all related to our emotional state and mental state. I mean, wow, I'm just fascinated about this human mind and the subconscious mind and the power it holds. Any experience you would want to share, any story that still stays with you, that you, with any of the women you work, the transformation stories you would want to share with us?
Yeah, there's one story that really does resonate with me. Is there's a woman who she just struggled with very deep anxiety and feelings of unworthiness. And so I did have sessions with her both on Zoom as well as in person. So she was able to have her sessions with the horses. And the horses and their gifts without using words, but to intuitively just reflect back to her so she could actually begin to recognize what they were representing, really helped her to be able to name and to really begin to see unconscious patterns in her life. Because the horses, they will, their movements, all of their movements are communication. The way they move their ears, the way they swish their tail, the way they dip their head, the way they turn their body. It's all communication when you understand the language. And as the person is held in this container, it's like you go between worlds and they can start to tune into things they never tuned into before. So they could really recognize patterns and recognize even people or things that were in that container for them. And she began to recognize that this wasn't who she really is with those patterns. And as we continued to explore the path, I remember her walking around and around in a circle and the horse walking around and around with her. And when you walk in a circle that's um, counterclockwise, you're unwinding energy. And as she was just naming all of these patterns and all of these things, she was walking in this circle that was unwinding the energy. The horses were yawning and snorting and even, you know, effocating. It was like they're just releasing all of this energy and licking and chewing. And when she was complete with that, she stopped and she was able to turn around and she started walking clockwise. And she started naming her truth of who she came here to be. It was so empowering. You could see her whole body, posture, everything, her voice just changed. The horses were just alert and life energy was up in them too. And it was so powerful to witness for them to have this recognition and empowerment as they move forward. And at the end of the session, it's like, well, how are you going to apply this to your life? Because when you learn something new, it's crucial that you apply it to your life so that you can begin
Yeah.
to integrate it and embody it.
Exactly. So we spoke about two things. One is horse constellation. The second is when somebody is going through the transformational journey, what and how they should navigate through it. So let's break down both these points for our listeners. First, let's talk about the horse constellation. I'm quite excited to know more about it. I was also going through some of your YouTube videos where you have demonstrated horse constellations in a session. I also read that horse understands or replicates human body language. So I'm quite curious to know more about it.
Yeah, well, you can take a deep dive, that's for sure. Horses basically saved my life when I was a child with the relationship I built with my first horse, Beauty. And as I went through my own training and became an advanced facilitator, helping others learn how to connect hearts with horses, it's just quite a deep dive. So I really love the neuroscience that helps us to recognize we all have the same circuits of emotion and motivation from Yak Panksept. That work that he's done is just beautiful work. And there's several different people that do offer trainings of how you can integrate this into your relationship with animals, whether it's dogs or whether it's horses, or whether it's zebras even. So we all have these same nervous systems. We're just more, some of us have different kind of evolution. Well, when you do a constellation with horses, that comes from family constellation therapy. And I first learned that as a counselor. And and then I just began to recognize the opportunity to integrate it with the horses. Many times, facilitators will just have a group of people that come together, and then that will volunteer to be representatives for whoever the person is that's receiving. That person is known as a seeker. They're seeking an answer to a question they have within them. And as it unfolds, it begins to reveal itself. Well, because we can connect on this intuitive, energetic level, I could see how the horses just did this so honestly, and thoughts wouldn't get in their way. They wouldn't take over some kind of a session or something, and they would just connect with the inner landscape of the person, depending on what they're focusing on. It's a very body-centered approach where when you're outside of the area, the picadero, it's the field of energy of the person's life. They will start with their back to the area. And then there's a body-centered approach where they actually start seeking their body's wisdom, naming their sensations, naming what the emotion is, naming what it is that they're telling themselves, and being able to start to connect, what's the message my body's giving me? And we do that several times, which starts to really, and I watch the herd and I see how they are responding to the energy as it emerges. Then they turn and they will face the picadero, and we will do the same process as they keep their eyes on the horse. It may be one horse, it may be the whole herd. And it depends on the person's situation. When they are ready to step in, they name what would they like to receive, and what would that look like? So they begin to actually connect the dots with what their experience was with where they're going. You need to know where you are now, as well as where you'd like to go, in order to be able to have choice points along the way. So when we step in, I accompany them, and we just see where their body moves them to intuitively and how the horses interact with them. And that goes in so different ways because each of us has our own experience of life. So each time it's going to be completely uniquely different. There's one that really, well, there's a couple that really stand out to me, but one time there's a lady there, and she was working on her family of origin. There was a lot of unrest in that family of origin. And as she was standing there and she's in the middle of the herd, all of a sudden this really big horsefly started zooming around and biting the different horses and stirred them up, and they started just running around. And I said, "Who's that? Who is that in this constellation?" And she's like, "Oh, that's my mother. She would just zoom it. She would just get us all stirred up and nobody would stay connected at all." As soon as she named it, everything settled down. But it's not just the horses, it's actually the container of life. So the wind, the birds, the insects, my barn cats, whatever comes in is a representation that's in service of the highest and best of this individual that's here or of this group. And from that experience of being held by life, there's so many more connections that they begin to make and recognize and name to integrate. Yeah.
I mean, as I was listening to you, I could see the kind of relationship I have with my fur baby. I mean, the day I wake up with anxiety, I see him also being anxious. The day I'm very happy, he's also be cheerful, running around the house, sharing his smiles. So, yeah, I mean, all this makes a lot more sense, but I think it's another science altogether, and I would love to learn more about it. So, we were talking about the transformation that people undergo, the journey that they have when they are transforming. So, what are the different challenges they may come across during that time, or the emotional complexities that they may have to navigate while they're healing or transformative journey?
One of the strongest patterns I've witnessed in myself as well as others is coming up against shame and blame. Those are very strong frequencies and they're very low frequencies in the frequency continuum. And when they come up, the neuroscience shows the shame reaction is a complete contraction. It's a
Hmm,
complete
exactly.
contraction. So we actually disconnect from life and we can even disconnect from ourselves, which can take a person into a bit of dissociation. So that's why it's so important to titrate, to really um, accompany someone to tune into where they are so they don't go into across that threshold of overwhelm. Not to be in a hurry. There's a trauma pull that people can get in a continuum of too, where they just want this done yesterday. And that's not that's not going to be what the body needs. That's kind of glossing over or denying or dismissing. And the body, the whole nervous system needs to be met with its inner experience in its own timing. And so for them to learn how to slow down, how to pause, how to just, there's a practice that I really have enjoyed is just let's take a pause. And so you just take a pause and you stay with the body until you can actually watch the shoulders drop. You can see the pulse as it starts to slow. There's so many signals that you can watch for. Just that deeper breath when it comes. It's like, oh, okay, I survived that moment. And that's what they need because it's a survival stimulated journey that you're bringing in the neural support, the resonance that allows that aspect to begin to relax so it can be absorbed instead of staying stuck and fragmented. And so those frequencies of shame and blame and rage, even when they're really strong, it's lividity that's at the top of that. Rather than reacting in alarm and creating that volcano, to be able to have a capacity, a practice that allows you to stay grounded and connected with life yourself, that's the lifeline. It's like throwing a buoy out of a big ship so somebody can come back in out of those deep ocean waves. Is that helpful? What comes up for you,
Yes.
Glenda?
Uh,
Yeah.
no, I mean, the next question that I had is how about the close relationships they are interacting with day in, day out? Because the individual is transforming, but the family members or the friends, uh, they have a they have been observing the person in a certain way. Now that person starts behaving differently or starts prioritizing themselves first. How would they react, and how would their reaction impacts the transforming journey of the individual?
Well, it depends on the dynamics of the family. And yet, when if the family has been accustomed to a certain way and it's working for them, there's benefits they're receiving from that, then they're not going to like the change.
Mm,
There's going to be a pushback to that. And so, what typically will
exactly.
happen is they will increase whatever dynamics they've been bringing to keep that
Mm,
person in line. They'll increase it to intimidate them to get them back in line. So they'll use the shame and they'll use the blame or they'll use the
yeah.
which can ignite it from within. So not only do you have this inner process that you're dealing with, it's being reinforced by what they're witnessing in their world. And so one of the practices that's so important for me in relationship is helping them slow it down. And I use the Healing You method, which is the two trees, to recognize which tree are you in, which pathway are you on. And when they can recognize, oh, I'm going by my conditioned reality, this is my conditioning, it's not mine, it's even generational. And we can take time with that, bring compassion to that. We can slow down, they can step back into their own heart of what do you really love? It's not the opposite of that. It's something possibly completely different. For me, horses and children, those are my first loves. That's my joy juice, you know? And then I can start to
Yeah.
just imagine and recognize where I'm going. One of the biggest skill sets is to differentiate yourself from others. And it's
Oh,
really huge. That differentiation and linkage is so crucial because we are all interconnected. And yet, just because my husband may have a certain point of view, I can have a conversation with him and I can choose my own path anyway without making him wrong and just being able to stay in clear contingent communication. That requires developing a language of life. And so one of the things
exactly.
I do is to really have some simple steps that people can practice. And when I'm working with somebody and their husband's the big quote trouble, then I invite them to bring them in if they're willing, when they're willing. So then I can see the dynamics, I can slow it down, and I can actually have them do some practices together where they start to experience something new. It's like learning a new dance step. They had an old dance step and that really wasn't working for at least one of them, probably not either one, because that's what they just thought this is the way it is. And when one starts changing the dance step, it causes difficulties. It's a perceived conflict. But when they can
Yeah.
both come in and be in choice and make the decision, they can learn a beautiful dance. Or they can choose different partners. It just, I don't have an attachment to what that outcome is going to look like.
Yeah. Or they may just decide they don't want to dance anymore together. Yeah, I mean that's quite a powerful thing, Gloria. You also mentioned about being careful about the kind of language we use, the resonant language you were sharing. So what is it and how one can shift their mindset by being careful about the kind of words they use?
Um, well, it begins with noticing each person's own experience. What do you tell yourself? I remember I would tell myself, oh, you're just so stupid. You're so dumb. Nobody's going to like you. Who do you think you are? And as I went through my own journey, I started to recognize that wasn't my voice. And I started to identify where the voices came from and go, huh, well, that's not my truth. And because all of us are born into this world very vulnerable, we didn't get to give consent for our experiences. Our parents did the best they could, but there's no such thing as perfect parenting. And so we end up receiving all of these imprints that we then make it mean what it means about us, what it means about others, and what it means about our world. When we can begin to recognize this, we can start to learn what I call the language of life, where I'm a wordsmith. I like to take each word and really see what's the energy in that word. As I lace them together, what am I creating? Because I'm a powerful creator, and how I stitch those words together, it creates a map for my life. And so the map, it was like for me, I was unraveling a tapestry that was never my tapestry of life to live, and being able to start to weave together a beautiful tapestry that I love. And so slowing people down to where they can start to recognize the language. And again, I come back to the two trees. And also the frequencies help because there's a continuum. When you reach courage, shame is just before death. And courage is just before empowerment, right? And you're empowered. And then you can continue of that continuum. We have all of these emotions. If you have one half is under courage and the other half is above, when you can bring them all together and recognize what is the communication that's coming from your body, then you can actually stay relational with it. And so resonant language is a language that holds a lot of care, as well as that seeking circuit's also really alive in it because it's moving, it's an action, and it's all goes so playful. If we don't have that playful connection in there, we don't have what's known as the neuroception of safety. And the body feels it. It's not a conscious thing, it's an unconscious thing. And so it's kind of a blending of all those together, as you said before, where you're noticing what am I telling myself or what am I calling forth with my words? And slowing down and not shaming yourself or blaming yourself, but making a repair. Say, oh, hold on a second. This is not exactly how I was wanting to come across. And then you own it. And when you can own it, rather than identifying with it, like, oh wow, it's kind of the difference between, oh, I was so traumatized, or no, I had I'm so filled with trauma rather than I had a traumatizing experience. The traumatizing experience is not who I am, you know? And so it's really being able to recognize what you're creating with your words.
You're so rightly mentioning it. The words, they shape our experiences, which further shapes our reality.
Yes.
And each of the words contain energy, so it depends on us whether we want to use it in a positive way or make it negative. And I think the kind of words that we use also impact the relationship that we have with our family. I mean, if I'll keep talking critical about my son, he would also grow being a self-critical person, and I would never want that to be. So yeah, I mean that's a great analogy that you used about the words holding energies. So Gloria, we'll come to the next segment, which is about how our listeners can transform themselves. So what are those insights, those small shift into the habits that they can make into their daily lives to transform themselves?
Well, the first thing that just comes to mind is an acronym, SNAP. So, like you snap your fingers. And so, when you notice that you've been triggered or you're feeling off balance, when you think of SNAP, the S stands for stop. So, just really stop. And then the N stands for notice. And I like to expand that. Notice your sensations. Name them to yourself. Notice what is that emotion that's beginning to surface and name that. And what's the need underneath that? Just really recognize what's activated here. And when you can name that, it really makes a difference. The notice goes into ask. And so it's asking yourself those questions. Just really take that moment, stop, notice, ask what's going on inside. Bring compassion in there. It's for like a small child when there's a baby, everybody's eyes warm up. They look at that baby, right? So there's the mother's eye gaze with the baby. When you can bring a warm eye gaze to your own body, it's so powerful. And then the P is for pivot. And the pivot is come back to your own heart. Give your heart to yourself over and over again. Another practice that I encourage people when they're starting out is there's several different kind of programs they could tune into, but to really have a practice of listening to a sound meditation because frequencies make such a difference. They meet our body in such a way with those frequencies that the connection is it's universal with all, and it doesn't have to be the words, but the words they sync up with those frequencies. So bringing in sound that your body will relax to and allowing yourself to be immersed in that. Many people love well, they use sound bowls. You can go to a sound therapy session. There's different things you can do, but even having a recorded tone or even doing a mantra or chanting, it's allowing the vibrations to move through the body and noticing where any tension might reside. And then just really allowing yourself to also release mental clutter. So it's having a practice that you practice. A practice is not a practice if it's, oh, that's cool, and then you don't do it. So the action of following through, of choosing yourself is so important too. And building empathy towards yourself, the compassionate understanding allows you to start to go deeper. These fundamental patterns can go quite deep, and I used to get kind of terrified at the idea until I learned that the unconscious things don't arise until we've developed that prefrontal cortex that stays present. And so, in a sense, it's kind of like you get to time travel to your inner child to allow them to receive what they didn't get because you've developed your adult self that has that compassion. And nobody understands you better than you.
You've rightly mentioned that nobody understands you better than you. And Gloria, I love this entire conversation. You have so much to share with our listeners, with this community, and you've been doing such amazing work. What is the vision that you have for yourself for next few years?
Oh, how my vision has shifted as it does. Everything's evolving. I really, I would love to be able to bridge the gap between what I said I started out with, where there was all this, I called it Western psychology, but it's modern therapies and stuff, and allow ourselves to be open to the ancient healing modalities that are there, and to be able to also make these tools really accessible to people. I mean, what an impact that would have made for me to being held that way as a child. And yet I really had the vision from the time I was young to do it differently, to really show up differently, to show up with my heart. And so I'm excited about integrating my practices of the sound therapy, the energy work, as well as the constellations with horses, along with resonant empathy, because more and more people need to know it's there. So what I've done with my vision is I've created new courses, and just the last few years I've really had a shift of the focus. And they're small groups, predominantly women, but I do have a few guys that come in anyway, and they just added really beautiful energy to the group. And they get to practice this way of being using the Healing You method. And then many times, what people would like to do when they've done a small group that stayed together for a while, they'll want to come and have an immersive retreat. So they get to come and they have then the group dynamics of their group that they meet in person, and then they get to become a part of the herd. And that's the common theme of people say, "Oh, I'm now part of the healing herd," and that's pretty cool. And I just want more ripples to go out. And so I'm creating spaces where individuals and small groups can reclaim their inner truth and communicate within themselves in that language that heals. Because when one person's light lights up, there's a continuum that happens. There's that resonance that happens. There's a contagion that opens up, and more people start to follow that, and it builds a momentum. And we really need that in our world.
Absolutely. And how can our listeners reach out to you if they want?
Well, I've just developed a new free educational email course. And so if the people go to my website, glorialybecker.com, there's a lot of free resources there, and you can reach out to me and I'd be in communication. You can sign up for my newsletter, and that way you'll be aware of new opportunities coming out. Or you can always just go and click the link to be able to have a chat, and I'll meet you right where you're at and see what would be of best service to you. So I'd love to have that conversation.
All those links for our listeners. And if anybody wants to reach out to you for their transformational journey, I'm glad that there'll be a way for them to reach out to you. And Gloria, thank you so much for this insightful conversation. I totally enjoyed this chat, and you had so much to give to our listeners. I'm sure everybody listening to this will enjoy this conversation as much as I did.
Oh, it was a rich exploration. We're just kindred souls here. It was just really fed my soul. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being there. What an inspiring conversation with Gloria today. From overcoming challenges to discovering transformative healing techniques, we learned so much. Thank you for joining us and stay tuned for more insights and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.